So I got early access to all the buffed Mondstadt characters, which Hoyo decided to call them Hexerei units. Put 2 of them in the same team, and now they unlock their new Hexerei buffs. Although some of these units have new powerful buffs that work without a second Hexerei character, which is pretty interesting and can lead to some new comps. And so in this video, I will briefly cover every single Hexerei unit, showcase their new powers, and share some build and team ideas for each of them. Okay, so starting with Mona, her new buff is really powerful and game-changing. As long as she's in a team with another Hexerei unit, which could be one of these Mondstadt characters shown here, including Durin, her normal attacks and charge attacks will now build these stacks called Astral Glow of Mercury. She could obtain a maximum of 3 stacks, which you can also track here, and then whenever anybody in the team besides Mona triggers Vaporize reaction, all stacks will be consumed, and for each one, vape damage will be increased by 5% or 15% total. And by testing this out, this 15% max stack buff roughly translates to actually 10% higher vaporized damage, as you can see here with Moika. It's a pretty decent improvement, but the real big buff she got has to do with this next part. So once she casts her burst, normally the Omen debuff, which gives 60% damage boost, only lasts for 5 seconds. And this was really only just useful for nuke showcases in the old days, since it didn't have a good practical use in longer fights. Well, let me introduce you to the Hexerei buff change. Now when the burst is deployed and Mona uses normal or charge attacks against enemy with Omen debuff, she will extend its duration by 2 seconds per hit to the max of 8 seconds. And honestly, her new rotation is just use the skill, burst, and then deliver exactly 4 normal attacks and swap out. The burst now gains additional 8-second duration, although technically since she spends about 1-2 seconds doing her 4 normals, it's effectively gaining 6 or 7-second duration. And so in total, Omen will now last for around 12 seconds. This is basically now the same duration as Benny's burst. So yeah, in short, with another Hexerei unit, Mona will allow other teammates to hit for higher vape damage. Granted, this will happen once unless she stays on the field, and then Omen will last for much longer. But what about her teams? Did anything change? Well, her Hydra application still remains lacking if she's not an on-field driver. But there is one really new strong team with Mulani, which also includes Sucrose, and then any good Pyro applicator like Mavuika, Durin, or Pyro MC. Basically how it works is that you set up with Mona some Hydra application, then swap to Sucrose to shred resistance with Vivi's set, and then go to Mulani and she starts hitting for over 420k vape damage. Nice. This team, however, lacks healing, so you can give Mona something like Prototype Amber, which will heal from its passive, and even slap on her Songs of Days Past artifact set. Other than that, you could also use her easily in Dark Durin on-field team with someone like Farina, Yelan, or Xingqiu, so they can enable consistent vapes for Durin. Or you can go for a team like this, where Mona stays on-field and keeps applying Hydro for Dark Durin, while other 2 units can be flexible supports. Like here, I use Shilonen and Albedo. Finally, I also tried out this team with Flins, Inefa, and Durin. It seemed to work fine, although I suspect keeping Lunar Charge becomes challenging without doing some weird rotations. So it's an alright team comp for fun. But still, Mona's long Omen duration can be quite useful for any team these days. Treat her now as 60% damage boost, plus if it's an attack scaler, you can give her Thrilling Tales and Tenacity artifact set. Now, as for her constellations, each of them have also been buffed, and since she's a standard unit, it's possible some may have or end up with extra copies of Mona. Now, C1 previously boosted Hydro-related reaction damage aside from freeze by 15%, and with the new changes, she doesn't need another Hexerei unit for this to work, and she simply now boosts these reactions by further 160%, which in reality it's 1.6 times of 15%, or it becomes 24% boost. It's an alright upgrade, but nothing too crazy. But C2 is a nice one. Previously, she had 20% chance with normals to perform coordinated charge attack, but now, within 5 seconds after using burst, her first normal will immediately land 1 coordinated charge attack. On top of that, anytime her charge attack hits an enemy, everyone gains 80 elemental mastery boost for 12 seconds. And as you can see, after I used the burst, landing her first normal also summoned that charge hit, and she immediately gains 2 stacks of Astral Glow. And Omen also counts that as 2 hits, or extra 4 seconds. So with C2, you just just need 3 normal hits to fully extend it, and this results in Mona having shorter on-field time. Overall, if you get her to C2, she ends up improving Durin's vape damage by about 15%, which is pretty good. And then as for Mulaney, C2 Mona gives her almost 20% damage boost, so really good upgrade if you like playing the Surfer Girl. Moving over, her C4 previously gave 15% crit rate boost when anybody would hit Omen affected enemy, while now it also gives 15% crit damage boost to all Hexerei units who hit it. So it is a bit of a niche upgrade, but remember, since Omen lasts for 12 seconds, literally everyone can utilize this long duration buff at C4 and treat them as having 15% crit rate. With C4, Mona now improves Durin's damage by about 25%, and for Mulaney it's a bit lower, like 20%, but overall, C4 Mona is a big upgrade for these teams, and you can treat her C4 as a serious contender for best in slot support. Finally, at C6, she previously had to do this stupid dashing to power up her charge attacks, but now, once Omen is deployed, she gains those charges every second up to 3 times, and in addition, her charge attack is literally doubled. What this means is that now we can play Mona as a Hydro carry. I tried her out in this team of Albedo, Shilonen, and Xiangling, and as you can see, she can hit for 250 to 275k damage with the build shown here. It's a rough build, but it works. Still, I would say C6 is still a bit janky to play, since her dashes can apply Hydro and remove Pyro Aura accidentally, her charge attacks can consume stamina, so you then rely on those coordinated charges to randomly strike when she spams normals, and I would say all in all, she's definitely not as strong as Mulaney, but can work as a pretty good Hydro carry at C6. Overall, to fully utilize Mona's extended Omen duration, she will rely on having another Hexerei unit in the team, and usually her best Hexerei pairings will be with Durin, Albedo, Fischl, and Sucrose. And I think the biggest winners here will be Durin and Mulaney, but Mona can be used with another Hexerei to help provide strong buffs for other DPS carries. So yeah, Mona got revived and she's pretty strong now. Now, Fischl is quite simple, I won't spend too much time on her. Basically, when with another Hexerei unit in the team, and Oz is deployed on the field, whenever anybody triggers Overloaded, Fischl and the active unit will gain 22.5% attack boost. And if Electro Charge or Lunar Charge is triggered, then they also both gain 90 EM boost. And get this, if you have her C6 unlocked, then those Hexerei buffs are doubled, so it goes to 45% attack and 180 EM. Pretty crazy. Just keep in mind, even if Fischl triggers Overloaded by summoning Oz, she will not snapshot that attack buff for herself. So the only way to gain attack or EM boost on her would require her to deploy Oz once, and then while she still has those buffs, snapshot them by redeploying him with burst or skill. So for example, use her skill, then within 10 seconds you do other setups, and then use her burst, and now it would have the attack and or EM buff. Is it worth it? Not really, it's more important for the main carry, but you can sometimes set it up this way. But yeah, with these new buffs, Fischl and Durin become a pretty strong core for any Overloaded or Overvape team, since with Overvape, she can grant both buffs to the active DPS carry. I mean, Fischl was always great, but this new Hexerei update just made her better. Now, Sucrose is in a similar situation as Fischl. Her Hexerei buffs are very short and sweet, although I would say her upgrade is probably one of the most irrelevant out of all the Hexerei units. In short, now with another Hexerei teammate, when she uses her skill, everyone gains 5.7% damage boost for 15 seconds, and 7.1% damage boost for 20 seconds when burst is used. On top of that, at C6, when her burst absorbs either Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo, teammates of that element gain additional 8.5% damage boost. Still, the best selling point of Sucrose nowadays is her extremely short rotation. Basically, you just use skill and sometimes do one normal attack and swap out. That's it. It's really rare these days you'd want to use her burst, especially since it could mess up rotations for Vape or Melt teams, so in reality, usually it's just going to be a small 5.7% damage boost for all. I mean, it's better than nothing. And as for the burst, I guess if you run her in a Electro Charge or Lunar Charge team as a driver, then sure, she can grant up to 21.3% damage boosting, so for the old school Taser teams, yeah, it's not bad. Overall, not super relevant, but a decent little buff she got, but the best thing about it is that she is treated as Hexerei, which can help enable others' abilities, plus she brings her own powerful buffing, which existed this whole time. The last 4-star of the Hexerei bunch is Razor, and long story short, he is really good now. Like, I would say probably one of the best 4-star damage dealers. Although, there is a huge catch. So, besides being a physical/electro DPS, Razor had huge energy problems, and he quickly faded into obscurity after the game released. Doesn't matter because even in 2021, I fully crowned him and he was my main guy for some time. Other than that, he briefly gained a bit of relevance in Sumeru when you could play him in this abomination of a team called Thundering Fury. But with the short sad boy history trivia out of the way, now that he received big buffs, what changed? Well, his elemental burst damage received a chunky 70% boost based on his attack, and he doesn't need another Hexerei unit for this to work, although he badly needs another Hexerei unit in order to function well, as you'll see in a moment. So what else? Well, in addition, now when he receives Electro Sigils during burst and they overflow, he will release an AoE attack based on 150% of his attack stat, and more importantly, he will recover 7 energy. This whole buff does require another Hexerei unit to be active, although I would say this buff does not matter unless you have his C6. Let me explain. So, the final updated change is located in his last constellation. Now, his charge up normal attack creates 3 sigils, and during burst, his skill also generates 3 sigils. And like always, he can consume these sigils by simply casting the burst initially. And when they are consumed, now his C6 also gives him 10% critical rate boost, and get this, 50% critical damage. So, straight up, he gains 70% crit value. Now, I don't want to delve too deep into how his sigils work because here's a very simple rotation to fully utilize everything. Just start with Razor by using either his charge up normal attack to apply Electro and gain 3 sigils, or use the skill. Then swap to other supports, set up buffs, and then when you swap back, simply use his burst, which consumes the 3 sigils he created previously, and use the skill immediately afterwards. Then just spam his attacks, and whenever the skill cooldown is over, use it as well. You should be able to use 2 skills during his burst, which results in 14 extra energy he will generate, which is super important because remember, during burst, he doesn't gain particles from the skill. And also, when he consumes those 3 sigils when using the burst initially, he immediately regains 15 energy. So effectively, he can get back 29 energy just like that. Now, I cannot stress this enough, but you really want to dash cancel out of his skill and always dash cancel out of the 4th normal attack because they both have very long animations, and his DPS drops massively if you let them play out. To me, that's not a problem, but he does have that 1.0 jank in him. Still, when it comes to his best teams, there's really only 2 that help him achieve modern DPS standards. First one would be with Durin, Benny, and Chevy. You really badly need Benny to be C6, so Razor can spam infused pyro attacks and cause overloads in the process. Without C6 Benny, Razor's damage simply nosedives. I would also say the same goes for Chevy. She definitely helps elevate Razor's damage when she's C6. Without it, it also suffers, but not as badly as without C6 Bennett's provided Pyro Infusion. However, what if you don't have Durin? Well, a less powerful alternative, but still a very good replacement would be Fischl. Remember, she's Hexerei, and causing overloads with her on the team will grant Razor 45% attack boost, and she will also provide good off-field damage. So yeah, these 2 teams are the only ones I would recommend running with the Wolf Boy if you want to achieve some big damage. I guess using him in Albedo, Farina, and Benny team could also be decent, but not as consistent as the other 2 comps. Besides that, Razor doesn't really have a good artifact set. You could use any of the ones I listed here, but overall, they are all about the same. Some are slightly worse. And as for main stats, attack stance, attack or either strong pyro or electro goblet is fine, but I prefer just using attack goblet since his damage is both pyro and electro with C6 Benny. And then of course, circlet is either crit rate or crit damage. As for claymores, there's a bunch of them, but really, he also doesn't use one specific good claymore. Any 5-star is usually a stat stick. Beacon is probably the best one, but Redhorn is also really good. And then 4-star options could be Tidal Shadow or Mailed Flower. So yeah, Razor, or should I say C6 Razor, is quite strong as you can see here. His hits aren't very big, but he unleashes tons of them. And I do like his dash cancel playstyle. But he is one of those guys who badly needs C6 Benny, and then gains further improvements with Durin or C6 Fischl and C6 Chevy. So niche options to build him, but if you have those units at specific constellation levels, it is pretty clear that Razor is really good now. Ah yes, the Drunken Bard. Who would have thought in 2025, Venti becomes a main DPS? Although that's not all. He's also gonna be great with other animal carries too. And this all becomes possible when Venti is in a team with another Hexerei unit. Now when his burst is deployed, when somebody else or Venti triggers Swirl Reaction, they will gain a 50% damage boost, and the burst will release an additional attack which will be 135% of its original damage. And this is interesting because other animal units can trigger Swirl to gain that damage boost benefit. And I quickly ran a few tests. For example, Xiao or Wanderer can gain that buff easily. And when I tested Xiao with Venti, Durin, and Shenyun, it was basically as good, if not slightly better when compared to Xiao's current meta comp of Farina, Shenyun, and Benny. I don't claim to be the best Xiao player, so your mileage may vary, but it is pretty fun to play double animal DPS comps. Now, Venti's normal attacks have also undergone Hexerei transformation, and as long as the burst is active, Venti's normal attacks gain animal infusion, will pierce enemies, and the damage is literally increased 2.5 times. You can see his Wind Sunder arrows dealing around 40 to 60k damage really fast, and then his skill can easily hit upwards of 100k damage when he is fully buffed. Really strong stuff. On top of that, he can extend the burst duration by up to 2 seconds when he lands his normals. So this is also worth doing when you play Venti as a damage support for others. Overall, his performance as a main DPS is about as good or even slightly better than Xiao or Wanderer, although keep in mind this is with Durin and Venti's new signature weapon. So yeah, Venti can now be played as a proper animal carry, and his best current team right now is a core of Benny with Durin, and then either Fischl, Albedo, or Farazan are good flexible options. As for the artifact sets, it seems to be that Echoes of an Offering is his best in slot set, but I wouldn't farm it yet, and wait to see if a Hexerei set is released in the future, since Durin is also in an awkward spot with his artifacts. Oh, and I was also using Venti's signature weapon. It has such a huge wall of text, but essentially, the passive provides a consistent 60% damage boost for him. Now, I will say this, without Durin and without Venti's signature, I tried running him on Song of Stillness free-to-play bow, and used only 4 stars Benny, C6 Farazan, and Fischl. The damage difference is very noticeable against single targets, like I cannot single cycle the Fatty or Clank boss, whereas with his signature and Durin, I am able to do that. Against groups of enemies, this will be less noticeable, but keep in mind, carry Venti against single target does feel premium. Although this is just early first impressions, so things may change. Speaking of which, all his constellations also got updated. C1 now allows his normals during burst to fire off 2 smaller hits, it's like, alright, but C2 is where he really shines. Like before, he can shred up to 24% animal and physical resistance with skill, but now it's easier to pull that off, plus after using burst, his skill cooldown resets, and his skill deals triple the amount of damage once. However, his normals during burst have a 25% chance to reset the boost, and then he can yet again deal triple the amount of skill's damage when used. Then C4 now simply allows everyone to gain 25% animal damage boost when he uses skill or burst, and C6 literally gives Venti a massive 100% crit damage boost when he hits enemies affected by the burst. Overall, I think you can now easily run Venti with another Hexerei unit and animal DPS carries like Xiao or Wanderer, but he can also dish out big damage himself if you play him as a main DPS. Although the total DPS is not as high as highest tier damage dealers, but it's pretty good and absolutely the best against groups of enemies, especially with the upcoming Spiral Abyss cycle. Even the new Stygian Onslaught boss is basically designed around Venti, so he will also be able to clear it easily. It's time to talk about my boy Albedo. So when he's in a team with another Hexerei unit, the new passive allows him to now generate a silver isotoma. And what is that? Well, previously, his skill generated a flower called Solar Isotoma, and its biggest issue was that it could get broken easily by bosses, and you couldn't place it on certain surfaces. Well, now, after he uses the skill, doesn't matter even if Solar Isotoma breaks, after he damages the enemy, Silver Isotoma immediately pops up, and this is not a construct. So for example, Chiori's second doll wouldn't be summoned if only Silver Isotomas were on field, but it also cannot be broken, and it won't lift you up into the air if you stand on it. On top of that, anytime enemy gets damaged by the released coordinated attack, a new Silver Isotoma always pops up near it, so the skill actually follows the enemy. Really nice. All in all, this new change makes it so that Albedo's skill can consistently damage the enemy. Just keep in mind, even if there are multiple isotomas on the field, only one coordinated attack is triggered every 2 seconds. However, that's not all. Albedo's skill damage literally got doubled when Silver Isotoma is on field, which is like gonna be always the case. And by doubled, I mean that. At talent level 10, skill has 240% defense multiplier, and from this passive, he gains another 240%. This is also a great change for those who didn't obtain Cinnabar Spindle, which was previously his best in slot weapon, and now, simply because of the increased multipliers, it offers less value. So you could easily use something like Flute of Spitzel, the Natlan Craftable, and he would end up like doing about the same damage if he had Cinnabar Spindle. I mean, Spindle still remains strongest usually, but the difference now is minimal. And finally, the last but a very important change. When Albedo's skill damages an enemy, he will boost whole team's damage by 3% for every 1000 defense he has, and maxes out at 12% or 3000 defense. However, Hexerei members on the team gain additional 30% boost. So in other words, Albedo buffs Hexerei units damage by 42%, while other units receive 12%. This is like giving him Cinder City artifact set for free when playing with Hexerei units. Really strong stuff. Overall, Albedo now deals much greater damage, his skill no longer breaks and follows the enemy, and he can provide a decent buff for non-Hexerei and a strong buff for Hexerei units. When it comes to teams, heck, you can place him anywhere to be honest, but he will work best with another Hexerei unit. Now, all his constellations also got updated, but since he is a limited unit, I'll just quickly go through them. C1 now in addition buffs his defense by 50%, which is decent. Then C2 is the big one because now it essentially allows him to cast the burst off-field whenever his skill hits 4 times, which will be every 8 seconds or so basically. On top of that, that special off-field burst also triggers his existing passive that boosts everyone's EM by 125. So, since you can obtain one of his constellations for free from the permanent event, I would say if you have C1 Albedo already and you really like him, this is a superb upgrade to get. I could be biased though, because I do have a soft spot for the guy. Now, C4 interestingly enables a similar playstyle like Shenyun. When Silver Isotoma is present, jumping height is increased, and one silver gets broken. So one of the carries can do some plunges. It's a fun little change. And C6 basically superpowers his burst. Again, this is just a good upgrade for those who wailed for Albedo a long time ago. I don't recommend chasing these upgrades when his limited banner is available. But yeah, Albedo is really good now. I would say better than Shiori at this point. However, nothing's stopping you from using them both in the same team, and they work pretty well. So, win-win for all. Let's talk about Klee's explosive return to the meta. With another Hexerei unit on the team, Klee's normals, skill, and burst will generate boom badges, and up to 3 can be gained this way. When she has 1, 2, or 3 badges, her next charge attack, which consumes explosive spark, will deal 115, 130, 150% higher damage. And this is just a straight up multiplying effect, so it would be 1.15, 1.3, or 1.5 times better damage. But that's not all. Her first passive also got updated with another Hexerei unit on the team. Now, during her burst, her normal attack sequence won't reset, and every third final hit of her attack string summons a coordinated boom boom charge attack. And interestingly enough, even without Hexerei, this first passive now also allows Klee to store up to 3 explosive sparks, and they can be gained with a 50% chance from normals, skill, and burst. Previously, you could only have 1. This means you can run her in teams with Farina, for example, without another Hexerei unit, and she will feel better after this update. Oh, and also, since her normal attack sequence doesn't reset, it is important to note her somewhat niche but popular Klee main's playstyle to do walk cancel normal attack will no longer work. To me, this sounds I don't have to learn this old technique and I can just spam her normal attack strings. Now, with these new changes, Klee definitely becomes a strong DPS in overload teams such as Benny, Fischl, and Chevy. In fact, I would say she doesn't rely that much on Durin like other Hexerei members, and she can perfectly run this team, but you could also replace Fischl with Durin if you pull for him. Safe to say, her playstyle is a lot more simplified. I also believe her normal attack animation has been increased, and so all you gotta do with this crazed explorer is just drop a skill, enter the burst, and spam normals and weave in charge attack if you want to. But most of the time, the special charge coordinated strike will be unleashed anyway. And also when it comes to her build options, they all remain the same, nothing changes. Now, because you can get one of her constellations for free, I would say C1 is a pretty strong upgrade for her, because her constellations also got updated, and now her C1 basically says that, well, whenever her C1 triggers, she also now gains 60% attack boost. So if you really like her and want an extra boost to her performance, grabbing C1 makes a lot more sense now. Moving onwards, C2 is kinda the same. It now just triggers after first skill hit, not when bombs of the skill explode that shred defense. Either way, if you had C1 Klee, and you can still get her copy from Constellation's event, it is a really good boost for her and the whole team. Then C4 as before works the same, but now if her burst animation ends while she's on field, she will deliver a big attack, which is pretty funny. And then C6 previously helped her with energy and everyone gained 10% pyro damage bonus. Well now, in addition, Klee gains extra 50% pyro damage, and then she can gamble with 50% chance to not consume explosive sparks, so more consistent coordinated charge attacks. And also now there's a 40% chance her normal's first or second hit can trigger the coordinated charge hit. Overall, decent Constellation's upgrade, but if you have her at C0, getting C1 is enough from Constellation's event. Last of the Hexerei is Durin. I've covered him in depth in my previous video, but long story short, he has this passive where if he's in white mode, he has the ability to shred any element resistance besides Cryo and Hydro by 20%, while in dark mode, his vapes and melts deal 40% more damage. Well, this changes when he is with another Hexerei unit, because now this passive gets multiplied by 75%. So now, White Durin would shred 35% resistance, or his dark side would deal 70% more damage with vapes and melts. That's basically it. Overall, this is a very good upgrade for the whole team, or when you want to vape or melt with Durin, and some of his best teams will always want to make sure he has another Hexerei unit with him to power up his passive. And yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully you found this video useful, but if you'd like a more in-depth guide of one of the Hexerei units, let me know in the comments. Also, I'd really appreciate if you could press the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. It's been a grueling grind, and I barely get to sleep and just trying to push out all the content. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.